I'm joined again with Dale Allison, who is the Richard J. Dearborn Professor of New Testament Studies at Princeton Theological Seminary. And we're going to be talking today about the resurrection of Jesus, exploring the question of did Jesus rise from the dead? This is in reference to Professor Allison's forthcoming book, Arguing Resurrection, Apologetics, Criticism, and History. Welcome back, Dale.
Glad to be here.
All right. Well, let's just launch into this. Hey, in your book, you say that something happened which led to Jesus' disciples and Paul to believe that Jesus had survived death in some supernatural way. But what? You then say, and I quote, "The question holds its proud place as the prize puzzle of New Testament research," end quote. Now, Gary Habermas, who you know well, he's now working on his life's work on the resurrection, his magnum opus, which I think he says is well over 5,000 pages. It's going to be. He's got a bibliography of more than 4,200. He says it's somewhere between 4,200 and 4,700 academic journal articles and books written since 1975. So that's about 100 journal articles and books on the resurrection every year. I mean, there's just no possible way that someone could stay current with everything written by scholars on the resurrection. So it's beyond dispute that the topic of Jesus's resurrection is something of tremendous interest among many New Testament scholars. It is the prize puzzle of New Testament research, as you say. So why do you think that is? We covered this a little bit in the last segment, but why do you think it is? It's so popular or big a topic.
First of all, there's the obvious response, which is that this is central to Christianity. So if you look at the four canonical Gospels, all four of them have their climaxes or conclusions in the resurrection stories, which agrees with Paul. Paul says this is the heart of what he's all about. He's about the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's what 1 Corinthians 15 is about, the resurrection. So this is central to Christianity. But here's the reason maybe that this continues to generate so much literature. You can have things that are central to your faith that aren't that controversial. So when Jesus was asked, what's the most important thing of all? Well, love God, love your neighbor. If God exists, that's a pretty reasonable thing to do. And nobody's ever criticized me for loving my neighbor. It's just not that controversial, right? But when you say some guy came back from the dead, that's controversial. It involves an astounding miracle claim that many people find beyond belief. So it becomes an area of controversy. And if it's an area of controversy, that means people are attacking it in one way or another. And it also means that the attackers are being responded to. So it's creating this gigantic literature that comes, I think, in large part from the belief being attacked and defended. Beyond that, however, this is just such a huge, fascinating topic. And maybe this will sound strange to your listeners, but if you could, I guess we really can't, but if you can just get back a little ways from our ideological debates, this is a huge, giant, fascinating question. It involves history, source criticism, comparative religion, philosophy, miracles, psychology, visions. This just goes everywhere. And so if you're curious and you have an open mind and you like big subjects, this has room for you, right? And I just this is a huge subject, and that's I don't mean to be impious here, but that's part of its fun. Okay, that's part of its fun.
Sure. So now, what's the difference between this new book and your 2005 book? Other than the new book is a few hundred pages longer.
Well, the first book was actually a collection of essays, and only one chapter was on the resurrection. That was a pretty long chapter. It was something like
half the book, isn't it?
175 pages. Yeah, maybe it's half the book. but I wasn't satisfied when I finished this. And of course, I've had my critics, and I've had second thoughts, and I've developed new arguments. I've rejected some of my own arguments. So I'm just not happy anymore with the piece that appeared in 2005. So if you're a writer and you're not happy with what you did earlier, you get to rewrite, and you get another chance. So in this book, I answer some of my critics, and refine arguments and revise arguments, and also just add a lot of new material. I think half of these chapters are totally new. They're unrelated to the previous book. And the other thing is that even where I'm revising earlier material, everything has been expanded. So I'd be unhappy if anyone ever cites that earlier piece again, because everything has been updated and revised. And I think it's new and improved. It's not just new, but it is improved.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So you said that there are some things that you now think and you disagree with what you wrote in 2005. Can you name a couple of those?
Well, so in the book we talked about last time, Night Comes, I have a whole chapter on resurrection, on the general resurrection of the dead and what it means and its problems and so on. And I also had a section on that in the original chapter. And without going into any details, those are just totally different things. So I excised that whole section from 2005. And in a footnote, I say, if you're interested, you can see the new and improved updated version of this in my other book. But philosophical reflections about resurrection of the dead are one of the things that I've revised. But I mean, it's not a radical change. Maybe I've also made some of my views clearer. Maybe we can come back to that. But
I remember when I was writing my book on the resurrection, I sent you an email. We corresponded a little bit because I was under the impression that you didn't think Jesus had been raised physically in that book, and you clarified that for me. There were a couple of things, and I remember you saying you thought it was a little confusing the way you'd written in that, but
let me interrupt you, Mike. In my own defense, I was sometimes deliberately unclear because I was still debating in my own mind what to think. And there's no point I don't think there's any point of being clear when you're not clear.
Yeah.
Or being dogmatic when you're not dogmatic.
Well, I think in 2005, I think you referred to yourself as I haven't read that book in over a decade, but I think you referred to yourself as a cryptic deist.
Yes,
and agnostic.
So I don't remember the agnostic thing. Maybe agnostic about certain historical conclusions, but I have seen that cited several times, and that's just like what you were referring to in the previous discussion we had. You couldn't believe you said something in a debate, but you really did. I'm not a cryptic deist. I've never been a cryptic deist. I don't know what the heck I was thinking. I think I was just being poetical and saying sometimes I look at the world and wonder where God is. I think that's all I was doing, but I am in no way a deist. And so that was a mistaken use of the English language. And it has no place in this second book.
Yeah, I don't recall reading that in your manuscript. Okay. So it is a good book. This new book it's a challenging one. Like I said, there are occasions in it when it made me feel uncomfortable, but you do a great job of defending your position. Give us an outline, a basic outline of the contents of that book.
Well, this book has 4 parts. Very simply, the first part is the introduction. The second part is historical critical. And the third part is what I call thinking with parallels. And then the fourth part is trying to bring everything together. So let me just elaborate a little bit. The introduction does 2 things. First of all, it surveys the territory and it sets forth the various theories for the origin of resurrection belief. And I can't remember whether I give 8 or 9 or 10 of these, but I try to classify the various options. Stolen body plus hallucination, God raised Jesus from the dead, or they really did see Jesus, but the tomb is a legend, or Jesus didn't exist, it's all mythological. I go through the different options, or Jesus didn't die, and so on, and try to give a good feel for the literature and the state of the discussion. The other thing I do in the introduction is I do the sort of postmodern thing, which is, here's who I am, here are my biases, here are my prejudices, reader beware, this is the historian who's writing this book, and here are his predilections, okay? So it's an attempt to be honest and tell everybody, what's coming. The second half is the conventional part, by which I mean just the old historical critical questions, the history of the confessions, God raised Jesus from the dead, and other formulations. 1 Corinthians 15, 3-8, where does that come from? What's its origin? The discussion of all the appearance stories from the first century. The story of Joseph of Arimathea, right? I look at the burial in great detail. I look at the story of the empty tomb in great detail. I expect those 2 chapters will get a lot of attention. But I also, in this section, discuss at great length, have a whole chapter on a passage that got you in trouble a few years ago, right? Matthew 27, 51-53, the strange passage about the resurrection of the holy ones. And it's a whole chapter on what that means. How did Matthew understand it? Is it fictional? And so on. So the historical critical questions and suggestions as to its origin. And then the final chapter in this section is one of my favorites. So what I do here is I look at the work of a German Roman Catholic scholar, Rudolf Pesch, who's now deceased. By the way, Pesch was, in my mind, a major scholar, and he's not received the attention he deserves in the English-speaking world, in part, I suppose, because very little of what he wrote has been translated. But he was a really important influence on me. His commentary on Mark, when I first read it in the 1970s, late 1970s, just fascinated me. So I've always felt in his debt, and I've read most of the stuff that he has written. So what I do in this chapter is I say, here's Rudolf Pesch's sort of skeptical view of what happened. This is not a traditional Christian view. And what I try to do here is play devil's advocate. So I want to be fair to everybody. I want to be open and honest. And here I say to myself, you know what? If I were a skeptic, which I'm not, but if I were a skeptic, what is the best scenario I could come up with? So, I happen to agree with most of your critical comments in your big book on resurrection. You're looking at some of these explanations of what happened. Some of them are pitiable in my judgment, or they just avoid the question. They're not things I can believe, okay? So I agree with your criticism of them. So I thought, can I do something better? And so this chapter starts with some ideas of Rudolf Pesch, and then tries to come up with a skeptical scenario. At the end of it, I say, this is why I don't buy the skeptical scenario, but I've done my best to put one out there, and let's see what people make of it. So the third section is the one that will get me in the most trouble. So nobody will like this section at all. I'm not even sure people will understand what I'm trying to do. So here's the tendency. I think, if we can split the discussion to apologists and polemicists. So what apologists tend to do is, when people cite parallels to the resurrection, let's say other visions of dead people or other stories of empty tombs and so on. What apologists tend to do is to bat away the parallels as quickly as possible because, understandably, for theological reasons, you want Jesus' resurrection to be unique. So your job, part of your job, is to downplay and dismiss parallels. The polemicists, the opponents, their job is to play them up, because they will say, well, we have these other empty tomb stories, they're legends, so this one must be a legend. Or all these people see Jesus, they're clearly hallucinating. Or all these people see Mary, they're clearly hallucinating. So what people are doing is they're using parallels either to attack, or they are trying to get rid of the parallels. I'm doing neither one. So this is why nobody's going to understand what I'm doing. I am trying to push parallels as far as I can in order to think. I am not interested in batting them away, and I'm not interested in using them to explain away the resurrection. I'm interested in thinking through these parallels in order to help me get a better picture of things. So maybe we'll come back to some of these parallels and talk about them briefly. But my goal is to think with them, not because I'm a reductionist who thinks these parallels explain everything that's going on in the early church or with Jesus, but because they help me to think about what happened and give me new perspective and new things to think about and new ideas and new possibilities. The final section is a retrospective, and one of the chapters, I hope I don't offend too many people, is a collection of what I call bad arguments from apologists, and one is bad arguments from polemicists and skeptics. Again, I'm trying to be even-handed. And then the last two chapters are, can I draw the threads together? What do we make of the whole thing? So introduction, historical, critical, parallels, and then putting things together at the end as best I can. So that's an outline of the book.
Wow, that's helpful. Thank you. So do you have you do have a single major conclusion. So the question I'm asking you here is, do you think Jesus rose from the dead? Yes, no, or yes or no with qualifications?
Okay, so it's yes with qualifications. Okay. So here's the first thing. And I don't know what's wrong with me, but it seems to me that in this context, that's not a question I am interested in. So in this context, all that matters is my arguments, right? So every week, this must happen to you too. Every week, somebody emails me and says, did Jesus rise from the dead? And I could answer, yes, sincerely, Dale Allison, right? But that would be unilluminating. Why is that unilluminating? Because it doesn't really matter what I think. All that matters is my reasons for thinking what I think. So from my point of view, in this context, I am nothing but my arguments. I am nothing but my arguments, no more, no less. If my arguments are good, then pay attention to my arguments. If my arguments are bad, well, then too bad for me. But I'm just my arguments. Who cares what I think? So that's my first qualification. I hope that makes a little sense. The second thing I have to say is that this is written from a halfway house on a journey, and I haven't gotten to the end. It's a dispatch from a halfway house. So that may seem silly given that I've been worrying about this since the 1970s, but my thoughts don't rest. They don't stop. I'm still learning. I still have new ideas. And I actually say at one point, I didn't finish this book. I just stopped because I could go on forever and ever and ever. I really just abandoned it. Okay. I just abandoned the project because it was getting long. As you said earlier, it's long. I could keep doing more and more things. So I'm still on a journey. I'm still thinking. I'm still trying to figure things out. And I think that's okay. And here's the other thing. And I developed this in the overture, which is part of the introduction. I say there, and I'm being honest, that I am not a single thinking mind. I'm not a monad. I am a multiple personality, and there are different selves within me, and these selves don't agree on everything. They get along well. They're amiable, but they don't agree. So one self, one part of me is my Christian self. This is the self that writes Luminous Dusk and Night Comes. This is the guy who says his prayers every morning and who teaches seminary students and goes to church. Okay, so that's that guy. But there is a second guy in there who is a critical historian, and he really is full of doubts. And he thinks Origen was right. Origen, in his commentary on John, somewhere says, one of the hardest things to do is to show that something happened, even if it did happen. Even if it happened, you can't always give the reasons to show that it did. And so this second person is a sort of skeptical historian. And at points, he wonders whether this book might not be too conservative. All right, this fellow. The third internal person is a full-blown, I don't know what you want to call it. Skeptic's the wrong word, but this person thinks we don't understand anything at all. In other words, we don't know what gravity is. We don't know what electrons are. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't really know metaphysically, ontologically, the nature of God, the soul. This person thinks everything in the world is really mysterious. So some people talk about apophatic theology. This person talks about apophatic everything. That is, we're stumbling around as we describe everything in the world. So this person is there too. And he's always saying, you really know what you're talking about, right? But there's a fourth guy in here, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk about him a little more. But this fourth guy is what's called a Fordian. Now, Fordian comes from a man named Charles Fort, very eccentric person in the first part of the 20th century, who went through scientific literature and just collected everything that didn't fit, everything that didn't make sense, things that didn't fit the paradigms. And so he would produce these books of things that make no sense, many of which were just plain weird. So this fourth person is a Fordian, and he doesn't believe the world is a rational place. He thinks that our minds draw lines, and we think that things should stay within the lines, but they don't. This fellow thinks that bizarre things happen a lot. This person is really strange and weird. And as I said, these four people are talking to each other, and they're just always there, and they're all me. So I don't know how to integrate them except to say that they happily talk to each other all the time. Okay, so my answer is yes, but I have to add those qualifications to it. Okay.
Yeah, and Dale, I appreciate you articulating that. I wouldn't say there are four that I have four persons, but I would say that there are two. I started off in my investigation of the resurrection in my doctoral research purely as a Christian apologist, seeking to approach the resurrection and proving it from a different direction, a fresh direction. But as I was studying the philosophy of history and historical method and reading philosophers of history in various books and history and theory and all that, I found that, they're saying there's no such thing as the unbiased historian. And by being biased, it really jeopardizes the integrity of one's investigation. And as a second guesser, a perpetual second guesser, my wife hates going shopping with me because, I just, it's like, Today is Christmas Eve, and I remember back in, I think it was 1979 or 1980, my parents asked what I wanted for Christmas, and I said, well, a new watch. And so my dad took me down to a jewelry store in Baltimore when I came home from Thanksgiving, and pick out a watch. Here's your price range. Pick out a watch, and it was between a Seiko and one of the new LCD electronic watches. And I just went. It probably took me 30 minutes to decide. And it's like, and you just second guess and all this. So, but if I'm going to do that with something as silly as a watch, I'm going to do it, especially something that is of ultimate importance, and that is one's worldview. So on the one hand, there's Mike Licona, I was trying to prove the resurrection as a Christian apologist from a new angle, but as a second guesser, I wanted to do this with integrity because I had experienced doubts for years, which I've since come to recognize it's because the way I'm wired, and many people experienced it. C.S. Lewis experienced doubts both as an atheist and as a Christian. Antony Flew, the great philosophical atheist in the 20th century, told Gary Habermas that when he was an atheist, he doubted his atheism every day. And yet he was, extremely influential as an atheist philosopher. But that developed a kind of character in me. So on the one hand, there's Mike Licona as a Christian apologist that I want to promote God's kingdom. I want to be a servant, a minister of Christ in ministry, and encourage people to become followers of Jesus, encourage the faith of believers who are doubting. On the other hand, there's the Mike Licona, who is a student of the New Testament, a historian that says, I want to know truth, and if truth leads me to a different conclusion, I want to embrace the truth no matter where it leads. And I don't have to fear truth. What I need to fear is that my biases will prevent me from discovering truth, and it costs me eternity. And you and I have had these discussions, via email where, there's this, how do you deal with this? And it's like, well, okay, if I can use the arguments and my findings in Christian apologetics, then that's great. But if I can't, well, that's fine with me too. I'm willing to hold some things in tension. And I know William Lane Craig feels the same. Once I asked him about, he rejects open theism, but on the other hand, he embraces an A theory of time. And I remember asking him, I said, Bill, A theory of time almost seems to suggest open theism, but yet you're against open theism. How do you deal with this? And he says, I know there's a tension there, and I just hold both of these positions. And I can't reconcile them at this point. But I appreciate the fact that you're willing to wrestle through these things with the four different individuals. I can certainly sympathize with that. Okay, so what are your main historical conclusions in your book?
Well, main historical conclusions. Let me just list several, and maybe these will be the main ones. This is what comes to mind. The first thing is that I think resurrection belief goes back to week 1, by which I mean the week after Jesus' crucifixion. So that there are some reconstructions or some histories of early Christianity which argue that the belief took hold gradually. It required some time to think and look through the scriptures and meditate and so on. I don't think so. I think this is there from week 1, and I mean literally week 1. I mean within 7 days of the crucifixion, and I give some reasons for that. The second thing is that for me, when the early Christians said Jesus rose from the dead, I believe that they were thinking in eschatological categories. And here, maybe your listeners need to know that I don't have the same view of eschatology that N.T. Wright does, that Tom Wright has. And so I think for them, the resurrection of Jesus was the beginning of the general resurrection, the start. I think that lies behind Paul's use of first fruits. I think it lies behind the passage, or at least how it would be understood, the passage in Matthew 27 about the saints rising from the dead. I think this is real eschatology, by which I mean end of the present age stuff. So that's a second thing. I don't think some people have argued that's a later idea, that maybe even Paul invented this. I think this is also week one stuff. This is somehow end of the world stuff. As far as things such as, gosh, the events that happened, I say that my conclusions, at one point I say my conclusions are embarrassingly antediluvian, by which I mean I end up agreeing with the basic memories that I see in the New Testament. In other words, I think some guy named Joseph of Arimathea buried Jesus and that people knew where it was. I think the tomb was empty. Jesus's body was gone on Sunday. Okay, those are conservative conclusions. I think that Mary Magdalene was probably the first to see the risen Jesus and to report it. And I think Peter had a vision of Jesus, or an encounter with the risen Jesus after that, and so on. So you can see why within my context, within my context, those are conservative conclusions, right? And some of my friends won't know what to make of this, and will, I just won't know what to make of it. But let me say this. There's also a theme that runs through this. And so you will like what I just said, those conservative conclusions. But apologists won't like a theme that runs through this book, which is how little we know. So I come back to this again and again and again. So you take the appearance to the 500. You just ask any question and you don't know the answer. Who were these people? Were they in the south? Were they in the north? Were they in Galilee? Were they in Jerusalem? I think myself that about the only thing we can know is that, or say is probable, is that it's post-Pentecostal. I can't imagine a crowd of 500 being gathered before the public proclamation of the resurrection at Pentecost. So I think this is a post-Pentecostal crowd. But what they saw, how many of these people knew Jesus really well? How did they see him? Really, how did they see him? 500 people, that's a lot. Now it's got to be an approximation, but was there a receiving line? Is there a jumbotron? Some of the church fathers actually think this must have been something like Acts, a heavenly vision. So he's somewhere up in the clouds, and they can see him at once. Anyway, my point is that I don't know the answers to any of these questions. I can't name a single person who was there. Can't name a single person who was there.
And I almost think, if I interrupt you just a little here, I think some of those, they are interesting questions, and certainly a lack of knowledge there. But I wonder if some of these just concern you too much. We have a few accounts of Caesar's crossing the Rubicon, and both Lucan and Suetonius tell us how when Caesar paused, there was an apparition there at the Rubicon, and he was, this apparition was, Caesar was there with a number of his leaders and soldiers, but none of the names of the leaders or soldiers are mentioned. Yeah, that's just a lack of knowledge. It doesn't really, hurt us though.
Okay. So whoa. So, I'm not saying this wasn't a real event. I'm just saying I don't know its content. So we also have Constantine telling Eusebius that he and his army saw a cross in the sky. So what is that? What happened? What really happened? It's from an eyewitness, according to Eusebius. I don't know what happened. I think there's a real something. Um, but but look, maybe the Corinthians knew more about this than we do. That's quite possible. On the other hand, I'm struck that Paul does not say, um, he appeared to the 500, among whom are, Fred and Jane, whom you know well. And he doesn't do that. Did these people go around the Mediterranean giving their testimonies? Um,
But it is oral tradition, right? I mean, we
yeah,
have an oral formula or two of them that are being cited by Paul here.
yeah,
So,
yes, but see, I don't. So you could say thousands saw Mary, or let's say thousands saw the sun dance at Fatima in Portugal, right? 19 what, 18? Okay, that's it. So what really happened? The fact that we have a sentence there and that I actually think something happened doesn't tell us what it was.
right.
I actually remember, and so I don't argue this in the book, but I say, how could anyone show it's not the case? I remember in high school, a friend of mine handing me a picture of Jesus in the clouds, right? And it was a cloud formation that looked kind of like Jesus, and he was passing it around as proof that, Jesus is still around. Actually, just this week, I saw online some story about a Marian apparition, and she was in the clouds, and it was filmed. And I looked at it, and I just thought, those are clouds. I don't think that's Mary.
Yeah.
So, if you have 500 people, again, I don't know what happened at all. That's my point. I don't know what happened. Maybe somebody worked them into a fervor, like at an evangelistic service. If it's after Pentecost, the people have to know people have already seen Jesus. Maybe he appeared. Maybe somebody said, "Oh, look, he's in the clouds." And who knows? Maybe he was in the clouds, but maybe he wasn't in the clouds. I'm just saying, as an historian, I don't know what to do with this. Again, just give me just one more example. So, um, what do you do with James? The story of James. Well, he saw Jesus. Okay, that's fine. But when did he see Jesus? Did it convert him? I see no reason that we have knowledge about when this took place. Now, since James doesn't show up until the middle of Acts, I'm thinking it's probably later. I'm thinking he probably already knows about the Christian claims, and for all I know, he'd already become a Christian. I don't
Well,
see any.
he's in the upper room at Pentecost when they're all praying. His
I
mother,
don't.
his brothers, his sisters are there with
Uh,
the disciples, right?
so what? So when does he see Jesus? I
Well,
don't know.
probably
So
been
there's.
before then.
How do you know?
Well, you can't for sure, but I mean, it just seems
Yeah,
like that
okay,
might be
okay.
the
Well,
most
there you
plausible.
go. There you go. There you go. So I'm trying to play historian. Did
Yeah,
he also appear to
but me
Mary?
too. We're
Did he
talking
appear to
about the
Mary?
difference between plausibility. We don't have to know things with certainty. We're just what seems the most plausible thing, or what seems reasonable to a reasonable place to put the appearance.
Okay. So would you also posit an appearance to Mary, his mother, who's also there? Why is she there?
No, well, of course, we would. I would look and say, well, the Gospels seem to suggest that none of Jesus' brothers were followers of Jesus during his lifetime. You've got the text in Mark which says they thought he was beside himself. You've got,
Yeah.
as John Meyer points out, even though he doesn't put a whole lot of weight behind it, he says that, you've got Jesus entrusting the care of his mother at the cross to the beloved disciple. Well, why not to one of Jesus' brothers? Well, because they probably weren't followers of Jesus at that
Okay.
time, right?
Okay. We probably don't want to go too much further into this, but um, I don't see any reason to read Paul into James, and I think that's what's happening. You can become a believer or a Christian without seeing the risen Jesus, and
Mhm.
I simply don't know what James' story was. The appearance could come later, it could come before. I'm not denying that his experience was like Paul's. I'm simply saying I don't know what it is. So these questions haunt me. And they're there at every turn. They're there at every turn. So that's a motif in the book, that you can ask questions of these texts, and they turn out in many ways to be what I would call thin. They don't have thick descriptions, and they don't carry a lot of data with them. The 500 just isn't there when I ask about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Maybe maybe a couple of other things. Again, some of your hearers may not like this, but one of my historical critical conclusions is that the story in Matthew 27:51 through 53 is not history. So you would agree with that, but I've argued that Matthew thought it was. And if Matthew thought it was, that means you have what you could only call fiction in the canonical stories themselves. And then I guess you asked me about historical critical conclusions, right? So
Yeah.
I guess this is the last thing I'll say. And it's just a puzzle. So not only am I embarrassingly antediluvian when it comes to some of the stories, but I think that the passion predictions are based on things Jesus said. But I don't understand why this is a plus for apologists. I don't understand why this isn't a plus for polemicists, even though I haven't seen them take it up. So here is what I would say if I were a skeptic, which I am not. But if I were a skeptic, I would say, well, Jesus prophesied catastrophe and redemption. He prophesied tribulation and vindication. He prophesied death and resurrection. And maybe he did these things because he was thinking eschatologically. But we do know from history that sometimes groups have taken prophecies that were not fulfilled, at least to everybody who doesn't belong to the group, and claimed that they were fulfilled. So you may know that the Seventh-day Adventists actually come from a group in the middle of the 19th century whose leader had prophesied the coming of Jesus, prophesied it once, nothing happened, prophesied it again, and a small group of people said, well, he did come again. It was an invisible coming. It took place in the heavens, and so on. So why are the passion predictions being historical good news? Why aren't they ammunition for the skeptic who says, well, maybe somebody stole the body? And then people said, well, Jesus prophesied death. He was right. He prophesied resurrection. Well, he's right about that too. Anyway, you can see where a skeptic could go here. And I have a whole chapter on this. I end up disagreeing with the skeptics, but I think it's a really complex matter. Once you look at some comparative religious materials, there really are a lot of people who have said such and such happened when to everybody else outside it didn't happen. So I think apologists need to revisit this, the meaning of the passion predictions. So I hope that chapter. By the way, I should say that one of my goals here is just to help the discussion along. I hope that's not too presumptuous. If arguments are bad or they need to be improved, then they're bad and need to be improved. I'm not telling everybody to conclude what I'm concluding. I'm trying to push the discussion forward. Okay.
You know, it comes. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
When it comes to the passion predictions, the question that raises it is if Jesus did so clearly predict his death and resurrection, as is portrayed in the Gospels, why is it that his disciples don't appear to be anticipating it? Even in the resurrection narratives, why is that? And that's a difficult question. And I know that you and I have different answers to that. But I recall reading yours, and it's like, wow, that's a pretty good one. I mean, it's a thorny issue. It's a thorny issue for sure. And I thought you did I thought yours is a very plausible answer to that. That very well might be the case. Well, let's wrap it up for this session now. And boy, our next one is going to be the one that a lot of folks, whether skeptics or evangelical, are going to make them feel uncomfortable. So I'm looking forward to that. We're going to be talking about the miraculous. We're going to be talking about some parallels. And so, hey, this has been an interesting discussion again, Dale, and thanks a lot, my friend.
Okay, thanks, Mike.